Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's the loudest statement a king can make. When the palace corridors trembled with Camilla's furious screams, everyone expected Charles to retreat into the quiet diplomacy he was famous for. But that day, something shifted. Behind closed doors, where public smiles and royal etiquette usually mask every fracture, Charles finally rose to defend the one person who had never asked for a fight, Kate Middleton. And what he did next stunned the entire household into breathless silence. Because for the first time in years, the king chose truth over tradition and family over fear. Before we dive deeper into this gripping royal moment, don't forget to tap like if you're already hooked and hit subscribe so you never miss our next royal deep dive. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful behind-the-palace story. Now, let's continue. The mornings at Clarence's house usually carried a gentle rhythm, soft footsteps from staff changing shifts, the quiet rustle of newspapers being arranged, the distant hum of London waking up. But lately, that familiar rhythm had been disturbed by something much colder, something that moved in the shadows between polite smiles and careful conversations. It started with whispers, the kind of whispers that glide through palace walls like drafts, too faint to grasp, but heavy enough to unsettle. For weeks, Kate had felt it, not in the obvious way the tabloids attacked her. She'd learned long ago how to ignore the noise of the press. This felt different. This was quieter, closer, almost personal. She never said anything at first. She didn't want to worry William. He was juggling royal duties, the children, and the endless pressure preparing for a future crown. The last thing she wanted was to add the weight of her discomfort to his shoulders. But William knew her too well. One evening, after the children were asleep and the house had gone still, he watched Kate at the fireplace, hands clasped tightly, eyes lowered, avoiding his gaze. "Something's wrong," he said softly. She hesitated before answering, choosing her words with care. "It's nothing serious. Just odd, really. The press seems to know things they shouldn't. Things no one outside our home could possibly know." William didn't push her, but his jaw clenched. He felt a prickling unease slide down his spine, because he had noticed it too. Small things at first. Specific comments in articles, strangely timed stories, private moments turned into public narratives within days. But denial is comforting, and William, for a time, chose to believe it was coincidence. Until it wasn't. A week later, a headline exploded across morning tabloids. Princess Kate secretly breaks down over parenting struggles. The article mentioned details so intimate, so painfully specific, that William dropped the paper as though it burned him. The story referenced Kate comforting a teary George after a hard day at school, an event only 4 adults had been present for, and one of them had repeated it. William didn't wait. He called his father immediately. And the moment Charles heard his son's voice, tight, exhausted, trembling with anger, he felt something inside him sharpen. "Come to Clarence's house," Charles said. "Now." When William arrived, Charles was already waiting in the study, hands locked behind his back, posture rigid. For a man known for patience, for diplomacy, for calm, Charles looked different today. Firmer, sharper, almost like the young prince he used to be, the one who had once been protective to a fault. William didn't bother with small talk. He placed a newspaper on the desk. "She cried last night," he murmured, "not because of the press. Because she feels like someone in this family is trying to break her down." Charles stared at the headline, and a chill ran across his expression. Not surprise, but recognition. Because he, too, had noticed the pattern. He had been watching it quietly for months. A series of leaks, each more detailed than the last. Each perfectly timed to strike, just as Kate's public confidence seemed strongest. He'd hoped, foolishly, that his suspicions were wrong. He sank into his chair. "Tell me everything." William spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. He described Kate's unease, the strange timing of stories, the way private conversations kept appearing in tabloids days later. And then he revealed the part that made Charles's stomach twist. The articles mentioned conversations from dinners, family dinners, things only a handful of people heard. Charles exhaled slowly. Only 4 people at one dinner, 5 at another, always the same inner ring. Always the same pattern. He had been in this world long enough to recognize the difference between random leaks and deliberate sabotage. And this was deliberate. The walls of Clarence's house felt heavier with every realization. Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens. Camilla was outside that afternoon, tending to her roses, chatting casually with a gardener. Anyone looking at her from a distance would see a woman relaxed, unbothered, maybe even content. But appearances in the royal world were the most fragile illusions of all. "Father?" William asked gently. Charles didn't answer, not right away, because in his chest, something old and powerful was stirring, a protective instinct that had lain dormant for years, resurfacing like a storm. He remembered the early days when Kate first entered the royal family, nervous, careful, deeply respectful of every tradition. He remembered how she would glance at him uncertainly during early dinners, worried she might say the wrong thing. And he remembered how, over time, she had grown into her role with grace, humility, and a quiet strength that commanded respect. She never complained, never demanded, never sought attention. And now she was being targeted. When Charles finally turned back to William, his expression was colder than the marble floors beneath their feet. "I've seen enough betrayals in my life to know when one has entered my home," he said quietly, "and I will not allow it again." William nodded. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want a spectacle. He wanted protection for Kate, for their children, for their peace. "What do we do?" he asked. Charles's mind was already turning. "We set a trap," the king said. "A quiet one, a precise one, because if the palace had a leak, he would not confront it blindly. He would expose it, not with anger, not with shouting, with silence, a silence sharp enough to reveal the one person who could not bear it. And so, in the days that followed, the King of England did something unexpected. He observed. He listened. He measured every reaction, every glance, every shift in tone. He studied the household the way a general studies the battlefield. And late one evening, Charles made his move. At a private dinner, with only one other person in the room, he casually mentioned a fabricated detail about Kate. Something small, believable, but entirely false. Something Kate herself didn't even know about. And he watched. He watched the flicker of surprise, the forced smile, the subtle tension in the shoulders. Hours later, as the palace slept, the king waited, not for an answer, for a headline, one that would confirm everything he feared, and everything he was ready to do next. For 3 days, Clarence's house held its breath. The air felt heavier. The staff moved more quietly. Even the royal guards posted at the gates sensed something was shifting behind the stone walls. Something they couldn't name, but could feel like a storm rolling in from the horizon, because King Charles was watching, not in anger, not in fear, but with purpose. He had set his trap with a single sentence, an invented detail about Kate's supposed plan to take on a new initiative. And now he waited for the world outside to echo it back to him. Not even William knew precisely what the fabricated detail was. Charles had been careful. If this information appeared in the press, then there would be no doubt. This would not be a misunderstanding. This would be betrayal. And betrayal inside a royal household carries a weight unlike anything else. On the morning of the 3rd day, Charles rose earlier than usual. He stepped into his study before sunrise, the sky outside still a deep blue. He didn't make tea. He didn't reach for his reading glasses. He simply sat, palms together, staring at the unopened stack of morning papers resting on his desk. He didn't touch them. Not yet. The silence felt powerful, almost sacred. His private secretary, James, stood at the door, hands clasped behind his back, face tightened with anticipation. "Your Majesty," James said softly, "the papers are here." Charles didn't look up. "Has anyone else read them?" "No, sir, as you requested." For a brief moment, Charles closed his eyes. He wasn't preparing himself for the answer. He was preparing himself for his reaction. Anger wasn't foreign to him, but righteous anger was something he rarely allowed himself to express. Too dangerous, too raw, too revealing. He exhaled once. Then he opened the first paper. The headline hit him like a physical blow. Princess Kate planned surprise mental health initiative amid family concerns. Every detail, location, timing, emotional angle, was identical to the fabricated information he had shared, word for word. Charles's jaw tightened. His throat felt dry. For a second, he did nothing. He didn't slam the paper down. He didn't shout. He didn't pace. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the ink, letting the truth settle into his bones. There it was, undeniable proof. He had given a false detail to only one person. Only one. A person he had chosen to trust. A person who had stood beside him through public storms. A person he had defended countless times. Camilla. The silence in the room didn't break. It shattered, not loudly, but in the quiet collapse of something Charles had spent years trying to build. And now, watching the lie he planted bloom across the front page, he felt a sharp, painful understanding. This wasn't a petty leak. This was intentional, calculated, repeated, a pattern that could no longer be ignored. "Shall I call Prince William, sir?" James asked, voice low. Charles nodded once, still staring at the paper. "And please," Charles added quietly, "ask the royal guards to increase security on the private wing. I want no movement I'm not informed about." James bowed. "Immediately, Your Majesty." As the secretary left, Charles leaned back in his chair, the weight of monarchy and fatherhood and betrayal all pressing in on him at once. William arrived within the hour, his face flushed with a mix of dread and fury. He barely greeted the staff as he strode toward the king's study. Two royal guards, normally expressionless, exchanged the faintest glance. Everyone felt the tension thickening the air. Inside the study, Charles held up the paper before his son could speak. "It's her," he said. William's eyes scanned the headline, and his shoulders sagged. He didn't explode. He didn't curse. He didn't pace. Instead, he sank into one of the leather chairs across from his father and let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. "So it was Camilla," he murmured. Charles nodded. "There's no other possibility." The room felt smaller, the windows darker. Even the light seemed unwilling to intrude. William rubbed his forehead. "Kate can't know yet, not until we decide what happens next." Charles agreed. "She's been through enough." The two men sat in silence for several seconds, the kind of silence that comes when truth is finally exposed and consequences must be chosen. "What will you do?" William finally asked. Charles didn't respond immediately. His eyes were distant, fixed on the garden where Camilla often walked among her roses. He remembered their long years together, years of scandal, years of rebuilding, years of trying to prove to the world that their bond mattered. And in that moment, Charles felt something unexpectedly sharp. Grief, not for their marriage, not for the headlines, but for the realization that even he, who had survived decades of royal storms, had been blind to the storm brewing inside his own home. "I'll speak to her," Charles said at last. His voice was firm, not shaken. "But William, when I confront her, I need you to be prepared." "Prepared for what?" William asked quietly. "For the truth, whatever form it takes." That evening, as the palace settled into its usual rhythms, the clinking of dinnerware, the soft chatter of staff, the muffled steps across the hallways, Charles waited in the quiet dining room. The room was warm, candlelit, elegant, a place designed for intimacy. But tonight, the table between Charles and Camilla felt like a battlefield. She entered wearing a soft blue dress, her expression pleasant, unsuspecting. For a moment, Charles watched her. He wondered if she realized anything was wrong, if she felt a shift in the air, if guilt left any trace on the face of a queen consort. "Darling," Camilla said, settling into her chair, "you look tired. Long day." Charles didn't answer with pleasantries. He didn't even sit. He placed a newspaper on the table, folded to the headline. Camilla's smile faltered. Barely. A flicker. But Charles saw it. 3 days ago, he began calmly. "I told you something in confidence about Catherine. Something that wasn't true. Something only you knew." Camilla swallowed. "And this morning," Charles continued, "it appeared in the press exactly as I said it." The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Camilla finally looked up, and for the first time, Charles saw it. The slightest tremor, like fear or guilt or both. Charles didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply asked one question. Why? That single word struck harder than any accusation could, because Charles wasn't speaking as a king. He was speaking as a man who had been betrayed in the most intimate way possible. Not by an enemy, but by someone who shared his home, his trust, his life. Camilla didn't answer immediately. She glanced at the doorway, as if calculating whether to defend herself, deny everything, or turn the situation into something she could control. But for the first time, she had no script, and Charles saw in her eyes. The truth was coming, and once spoken, nothing in the royal family would ever be the same. Camilla's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair. For a moment, she looked like a woman caught between two instincts. Deny everything or let the truth tumble out before it crushed her. The candlelight flickered across her face, revealing something Charles had not seen in years. Fear. Charles, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. Before you say anything else, you must understand. No, Charles cut in. Calm, sharp, unwavering. I only want the truth. No excuses. No distractions. Just tell me why. The silence hung so thick that even the steady tick of the antique clock seemed too loud. Camilla inhaled slowly, her composure slipping with each passing second. You think I did all this out of cruelty? Out of malice? She said, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and exhaustion. You think this was some deliberate attempt to hurt Kate? Charles didn't blink. I think, he said quietly, that you betrayed our family, and I need to know why. Her lips tightened. Something inside her cracked, not loudly, but in a way Charles could feel. You want the truth? She said, suddenly lifting her chin. Fine. The words came out sharper than he expected. I was tired. Tired? Charles echoed. Tired, she repeated, voice thickening. Do you have any idea what it's like to live in her shadow? To walk into every room and feel eyes shift past into her? To see the headlines praising her as a future, while I, your wife, am treated like an irrelevant relic. Charles's jaw clenched. Jealousy is no justification. Oh, don't act like you don't see it. Camilla snapped, rising from her seat. Every time she appears, the press glows. The public adores her. They call her the Monarchy's savior. And me, after everything I gave up, after everything I endured to stand beside you, I'm still the villain in every story. Her breathing grew uneven. Her hands trembled. And the worst part, she whispered, you never denied it. You never told them they were wrong. You let them worship her while I became invisible. Charles stared at her, stunned not by her words, but by how deeply she believed them. You weren't invisible, he said softly. You were my partner, my wife, my confidant. Camilla laughed bitterly. And yet, one young woman with a perfect smile and a perfect family managed to eclipse everything I built. Charles shook his head slowly. So you punish her? A woman who has never spoken an unkind word about you. Camilla swallowed. I didn't mean for it to go this far. At first, it was just correcting the narrative, helping the reporters understand the real dynamic. But then they wanted more details. They pushed, and once I started, She faltered. Charles felt his blood run cold. You couldn't stop. Camilla looked away. Shame and defiance collided in her eyes. They'd paid well, she admitted. And the attention, the control, it reminded me that I still mattered. That control, Charles said, voice trembling with restrained fury, came at the cost of Kate's dignity, her peace, her trust. And what about mine? Camilla shot back. Do you know how many nights I've cried in this house? How many times I felt like an outsider in my own marriage because you refused to defend me publicly? Charles stared at her, and for a fleeting moment, he felt the echo of compassion. But the compassion was smothered immediately by the memory of Kate's tear-strained voice. The image of William pacing in fear. The headline slicing through Kate's quiet confidence. When you hurt her, Charles said, you hurt all of us. Camilla's eyes burned, anger, heartbreak, and something darker swirling beneath the surface. You've always loved her, Camilla said quietly, almost accusingly. Charles narrowed his gaze. I love my family. No, she said, stepping closer. You love Kate differently. I've seen it. The way you defend her, the way you look at her like she's a daughter you never had. And I hate it, because I will never be that. Not to you, not to anyone. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Charles saw her vulnerability naked and raw. But then almost instantly it twisted. She made you choose, Camilla whispered. And you chose her. No, Charles said firmly. You made this choice. The moment you betrayed her. The moment you sold our family's trust for headlines. The finality of his words hit her like a blow. Camilla sank back into her chair, trembling. Charles, please. I'm your wife. We can fix this. You don't have to destroy everything we built. But Charles's expression didn't soften. There is nothing left to fix, he said. You broke something sacred. The room went unbearably quiet. Then, a knock at the door. The Royal Guard captain stepped inside, his face unreadable, posture rigid. Your Majesty, he said, bowing. The Prince and Princess of Wales have arrived. Camilla's eyes widened with panic. No, she whispered, voice shaking. Don't tell her. Please. Charles, please. Kate doesn't need to know it was me. Charles felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders like armor. Heavy but necessary. She deserves the truth. Camilla stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing what is right, Charles said. Camilla shook her head wildly. If you expose me, the press will tear me apart. I'll be the monster again. More than ever. You know what they did to me last time. Charles's eyes softened, but only for a moment. I warned you years ago that loyalty is the most precious currency in this family, and you spent yours carelessly. Her breath caught, not from shock, but realization. She knew he was right, and she knew the moment was no longer hers to control. Suddenly, from the hallway, Kate's laughter drifted in, soft, melodic, utterly unaware of the storm brewing behind the dining room doors. Camilla froze, her face drained of color. The contrast, the warmth of Kate's presence against the coldness of her own guilt, shattered whatever remained of Camilla's composure. You won't survive this, she whispered, almost snarling. When this gets out, the monarchy will crumble. They'll call you weak for siding with her. They'll say you abandoned your wife. Charles stepped toward the door, ignoring the threat. They can say whatever they want, he replied. But my conscience will be clear. He reached for the handle. Camilla lunged. Charles, don't you dare. Her voice cracked into a scream that echoed off the walls, sharp, frantic, wounded, a sound that sliced through the palace like a warning bell. Royal guards rushed forward instinctively, but Charles didn't flinch. He opened the door, and there stood William and Kate. Kate's eyes widened, her expression shifting instantly from curiosity to alarm as Camilla's trembling form came into view. And in that instant, between Camilla's scream and Kate's startled inhale, the palace fell into a silence so deep, so absolute, that even Camilla couldn't break it, because truth had finally stepped into the light, and there was no turning back. For a moment, none of them moved. Kate stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still wrapped around William's arm, eyes darting between Charles's steady posture and Camilla's unraveling form. The queen consort looked nothing like the perfectly composed figure the public knew. Her hair was loose, her face streaked with shock, fear, and something far more fragile, guilt. The silence was thick, heavy enough to make the royal guards outside shift uncomfortably. Kate, Camilla whispered, voice trembling. You weren't supposed to hear any of this. Kate swallowed hard. She stepped inside slowly, every movement careful, controlled, as though one wrong gesture might cause the entire room to shatter. Camilla, she said gently, what's happening? Camilla's shoulders tensed. Her lips parted, but no words escaped. She looked at Charles, her expression pleading, begging for him to protect her, to explain, to soften the blow. But Charles didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply met Kate's gaze and said, she was the one, the person leaking stories about you, the person hurting you from inside this family. Kate's breath hitched. Her eyes widened, not with anger, but disbelief so pure that it cut deeper than any accusation. Camilla flinched. William stepped closer to his wife, placing a protective hand between her shoulder blades. For a moment, Kate didn't react. She still like someone trying to reorient herself after the ground had suddenly tilted. Kate whispered. But why? Camilla let out a strangled sound, a mix between a sob and a laugh. Why? Because you took everything from me. Everything I fought for, gone the moment you stepped into this family with your perfect smile and perfect children and perfect everything. Kate blinked, stunned. I never tried to take anything from you. I know. Camilla cried, voice cracking. That's what makes it worse. William stiffened. So you punished her because you felt overshadowed? You targeted my wife because of jealousy. Camilla spun toward him, desperation pouring from her. You don't understand what it's like. I spent years rebuilding my image, years fighting the world to be accepted. And just when people started to soften, just when the tide began to turn, she arrived. And suddenly I was a villain again. Her voice rose unsteady. Every headline, every comparison, every comment. Kate is more graceful. Kate is more beloved. Kate is the future. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be reminded daily that you'll never be enough? Kate stepped forward, shockingly calm despite the tremor in her hands. Camilla, I never wanted to be compared to you. I never wanted to replace you. All I ever wanted was peace. Peace. Camilla whispered. You think peace exists in this family? Charles's expression hardened. It could have, if you hadn't destroyed it. Camilla staggered backward as though struck. She looked at Charles like a woman, watching the last lifeline slip from her grasp. You're really doing this, she breathed. You're choosing her. Over me? I'm choosing honesty, Charles said, integrity, and the safety of my family. Camilla's eyes glistened with tears, but not the soft, sorrowful kind. These were the hot, furious tears of someone whose illusions have finally cracked. You think the public will forgive you for this, she hissed. You think they'll applaud you for casting out your own wife? They'll call you weak. They'll tear you apart. Charles met her gaze without flinching. They've torn me apart before. I survived. And what about me? Camilla trembled. What happens to me now? You will step back from your duties, Charles said quietly. You will leave Clarence's house, and my lawyers will contact yours about separation. Kate's hand flew to her mouth. William exhaled sharply, but he didn't object. Camilla let out a broken, disbelieving sound. Separation? Charles, you can't. You can't do this. You made this decision, Charles replied, the moment you sold our family's trust. The word struck harder than any scream. Camilla stumbled toward the door, past Kate, who instinctively stepped aside, past William, past the guards waiting in the hall. Her heels clicked against a marble, echoing down the corridor like the final beat of a fading era. And then she was gone. The house felt strangely, impossibly quiet. Kate stood in the center of the room, staring at the doorway long after Camilla's footsteps had faded. Her eyes were glassy, but no tears fell. Instead, there was a look of profound exhaustion, of release. Are you okay? William asked softly. Kate nodded, though her voice trembled. I didn't expect it to be her. Charles stepped closer, his expression tight with regret. You deserve the truth. And you deserve better than what she put you through. Kate exhaled shakily. I just want a family to be whole. Charles's gaze softened. We will be, starting now. In the days that followed, the palace moved through a strange transition. Camilla's departure rippled through courtiers, staff, public relations teams, and the royal guards who suddenly found themselves escorting a queen consort not to an engagement, but out of her home. The press sensed something massive brewing. Headlines speculated. Commentators whispered. People wondered if the monarchy was on the brink of another earthquake. But inside the palace, something unexpected happened. Things grew calmer. Kate breathed easier. William slept better. And Charles, despite the storm raging outside, found a quiet clarity he hadn't felt in years. He spent more time with his grandchildren. He shared long discussions with William about the future. He checked in on Kate, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. Little by little, the wounds began to close. One evening, the three of them sat around a small table in the blue drawing room, the same room where the truth had first cracked open. Charles cleared his throat. "I've made a decision." Kate and William looked up. "I want to rebuild our family from the inside out," he said. "No more secrets, no more silent suffering, and no more letting tradition excuse cruelty." Kate felt a warmth rise behind her eyes. Charles continued, "And I want you by my side as we shape that future. Kate, your strength, your grace, those qualities are what this family needs most." William smiled at her. "Dad's right." For the first time in months, Kate allowed herself to believe it. The next week, the palace released a simple, dignified statement. The Queen Consort has stepped back from public duties due to personal reasons. They didn't need to say more. The truth lived between the lines. Public sympathy surged for Kate, for William, for Charles, who had finally stood up for the daughter-in-law who had never once asked for a crown of protection, but deserved one. Months later, as spring sunlight warmed the gardens of Clarence's house, Kate stood beside Charles watching the children chase butterflies between the rose bushes. "Thank you," Kate said quietly, "for choosing us." Charles glanced at her, eyes softening. "Family," he said simply, "is the only crown that matters." And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, sunlight, and the gentle hush of monarchy finally healing, Kate realized something. Silence doesn't always hide pain. Sometimes it protects truth. And when Charles stood up for her that day, he didn't just break Camilla's deception. He built a new beginning, a new royal dawn, a family stronger than betrayal, a monarchy kinder than its history, and a future where Kate finally felt safe, seen, and unbreakably valued.